what I really want to talk about is this idea of interacting with people that applies in multiple different levels. And those interactions can take place in the context of marriage, parenting, business, community, society. And when we're interacting with other people, there is one framing of the dynamic which becomes perhaps the most complex part of that framing. And that is the framing and the tension between firmness and flexibility, between the search for integrity, honesty, and approval. These are constantly in tension with one another. The idea of moral courage and independence, on the other hand, with the idea of getting on with people, pacifying, calming. There is chutzpah, which is an approach of audacity and jarring versus accommodating, pacifying, appeasing. These tensions apply in every dynamic, from the most intimate relationship into the world of global politics, where you have this constant tension between appeasement and firmness. And how do you deal with the complexities of what human society is all about? At the heart of it is that. And in this week's Parsha, Pinhas, we encounter a character who took a very bold stand on behalf of God and the Jewish people and on behalf of Torah values, which we read about at the closing of last week's Parsha. But this week's Parsha carries his name. This week's Parsha carries the name of Pinhas, and he is rewarded by Hashem for his act of bravery and boldness, which he demonstrated in a very, very dramatic way, where in fact he challenged one of the leaders of the Jewish people. There was a crisis, because one of the ways the military tactics that were employed by Moab, the warring nation against the Jewish people as they were getting closer to the land of Israel, was to undermine the morality, the ethics, the values of the Jewish people, and they sent their women to entice the men of the Jewish people and to entice them into worshipping idols and all of the value system represented by Moab. They went to attack, instead of the body of the Jewish people, but the soul of the Jewish people. And when all of that was happening, one of the princes of the tribe of Shimon, Zimri, the Torah describes, conducted himself and carried out an act of public immorality in the face of everybody, and it was Pinhas who stepped in to stop it and attack them and to say, listen, enough is enough. And he was rewarded for that. But it was a really bold move on his part, because Rashi says at the beginning of this week's Parsha that, in fact, he was mocked for it, because his mother's father, his grandfather, was Yitro, who was known for his worshipping of idols. He'd gone on a long spiritual path himself, and there was a time in his life where he was a priest in idolatrous services. So they said to him, you Pinhas, you're the grandson of an idolater, and you have challenged and taken down the prince of the tribe of Shimon. So it took a lot of personal courage and boldness, and for that he's rewarded. So he epitomizes the concept of leadership through boldness, through audacity, through chutzpah, through firmness, through standing up for principle. And that is actually described very strongly in one of the mishnas in Pirkei Avot in chapter 5, Mishnah 23. Yehuda ben Taimah says, Have az kanamer, be as bold as a leopard. And he deploys the different analogies from animals, looking at the qualities from animals to say, how can human beings incorporate that into our character development? And he takes out the quality of the leopard as boldness. Interesting, in the same Mishnah, he says, have a gibor ka'ari, be as strong as a lion. Now, strong as a lion means, according to the way the Torah interprets it, it is the personal self-discipline to overcome temptation. That's something which is very internal. But the Torah, who wrote one of the, which is one of the main books of halacha, which was actually the predecessor to the Shulchan Aruch, upon which the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, is actually based on that structure. The Torah actually begins with the statement from Pirkei Avot and says, this is the way to conduct yourself. And then he says he wants to begin with, which is probably, he says, the most important principle in conduct and how we behave, and that is have az kanamer, be as bold as a leopard, which he says is not about the internal self-discipline. It is the courage to be different. It is the courage to stand out and stand up for your principles of what it is to be a Jew, even if other people will mock you or laugh at you or do not understand, but to be able not to be embarrassed or intimidated, to do mitzvahs with a full heart, no matter who's watching, and to do it proudly and publicly. That, he says, is actually the foundation. He begins his entire code of Jewish law using that principle, have az kaname, be as bold as the leopard. And he quotes here from the verse in Psalms, King David, who wrote, Va'adabra be'edotecha lifnei malachim v'lo evosh, I will speak of your statutes in front of kings, and I will not be embarrassed. That is a verse from the book of Psalms, and he quotes that from King David. By the way, I have a framed picture of that verse in my office because I feel it's a very important guiding principle in the work that I do. And this is exactly what Pinhas did. Pinhas was not afraid. He was not embarrassed. He was not intimidated. He says, what you're doing is a violation of the whole mission and destiny and values of the Jewish people, and I'm going to stand up. You may be the prince of the tribe of Shimon. I may not have the yichus, but I'm going to stand up against you and to say what is right, and to do so in a chutzpahdik and unapologetic way. That, says the Tur, is a very important thing, and it doesn't only apply in the sphere of politics. It could apply in a person in a closed social setting where someone's speaking Lashon Hara and then you refuse to participate. You say, we can't speak Lashon Hara. This is not right. It's wrong. It takes a lot of personal courage, because what will people say? Will they mock? Will they laugh? Will you be ostracized socially? Person who walks around or has to say to a boss, look, I have to leave early Friday afternoon, Shabbos is coming in, takes a lot of personal courage to be able to stand up for what is right and do the mitzvahs and to fulfill with integrity when there is social pressure moving in the other direction. That is what the Mishnah means, have az kaname, be as bold as the leopard. And yet, the very next Mishnah, chapter 5, Mishnah 24, the very next Mishnah, by the same Tana, the same sage who said the first one, Hu haya omer az panim legehenom. He uses the same word. The brazen, be as bold, we said before, as bold as a leopard, as brazen as a leopard. Az panim, the brazen face, legehenom. Go to Gehenom, which is the spiritual retribution in the next world for sin. Uboshet panim, the opposite quality, the modesty, the reticence, the humility, the sensitivity, legan eden, goes to heaven. So that is, and that, by the way, is very unusual language in the context of Pirkei Avot. The statements of Pirkei Avot are a lot, as we've seen already in this journey that we've done over these last weeks. The statements of Pirkei Avot are much more gentle than this. This is about the harshest statement, I think, in all of Pirkei Avot, when it says, this goes to Gehenom, this goes to Gan Eden. This is for retribution in the next world, this is for reward in the next world. And it's the same Hebrew word. He used the word az kanamer, be as brazen and as bold as the leopard. And that brazenness means doesn't matter what people think. On the other hand, it says a brazen person goes to Gehenom. Now, how do we put those together? Because actually our sages say that the quality that he's talking about, which is boshet panim, busha, which in modern Hebrew means shame, but it's not the correct translation. We'll delve into the right translation of this word in a few moments. But the word boshet panim, it's a modesty, it's a reticence, it's a humility, it's a sensitivity and an empathy. That is a defining quality of what it means to be a Jew. In fact, the Gemara says there are 3 defining qualities of the Jewish people: Baishanim, Gomlei Chasadim, and Rachmanim. Rachmanim is compassionate. Baishanim, from this word busha, modest, reticent, understanding, and Gomlei Chasadim, those who do kindness. So this goes to the heart of Jewish identity. And yet, az kanamir, how do we put these two things together? Which means sometimes it is called for to be bold and to be brazen in defense of moral principles. Sometimes it's called to be a bit more reticent. Sometimes firmness is called for. Sometimes flexibility is called for. Sometimes independence, integrity, brashness. In a sense, it doesn't matter what people say. On the other hand, we're trying to win people over. We're trying to do it softly, appease, pacify. So how do we put these two things together? Because you actually have contrasting mishnas right next to each other in Pirkei Avot, and that sets up then the conflict between these two values. So there are three principles that I think can navigate how we manage these two conflicting values. Number one, and we've seen this before, a cardinal principle of Pirkei Avot, which the Rambam develops in many different parts of his writings, and that is for character development, the ideal is the derech hamamutza, the derech ha'imtzai, the middle path. Meaning the whole essence of character development is the ability to hold contrasting values and to hold the fact that sometimes you need the one and sometimes you need the other, sometimes you need a blend of the two. It's never that simple. And this is a principle that we have explored over these weeks. So we have to hold them together. It's not easy to do so. In fact, the Sforno says, because the continuation of that Mishnah that says that the az panim, the brazen face will go to Gehenna. The Sforno, the Mishnah continues and says, may it be your will, Hashem, that the temple should be rebuilt. All of a sudden, it just puts it there in the Mishnah, may it be the will of Hashem, that your temple, what's that got to do with this in the Mishnah? So the Sforno says, because we'll never really know until we have the clarity of a world with a temple and the presence of Hashem, there's always going to be this murkiness within it. There are no simple, straightforward answers. Somehow we have to live with the complexity, with the messiness of it, with the fact that it's unresolved, balancing between the two. So the one principle is the principle of balance. The second principle, which is what the Rambam says, he said, note very carefully, when he said be as bold as a leopard, it says, and the conclusion of that mission is, la'asot ritzon avicha shebashamayim, to fulfill the will of your Father in heaven. Meaning the motivation here is to do good. That's the motivation. It's not to be right. It's not to impress. It's not to defeat an opponent. The motivation is to fulfill the will of Hashem. Sometimes to fulfill the will of Hashem requires firmness and boldness. Sometimes to fulfill the will of Hashem requires retreat and appeasement. We got to know when, but the guiding North Star is, what does Hashem want? What do the mitzvahs say? What is the right thing to do under these circumstances? That's principle number 2. Principle number 3, to resolve this conflict, and I think this goes to the real heart of it, because those two guiding principles, balance and following the will of Hashem, they are in a sense the givens when dealing with any kind of analysis like this. The third principle here is really how to understand this concept which seems so elusive of what the Mishnah calls boshet panim, busha, which, as I've said, in modern Hebrew is shame, but actually in Mishnaic Hebrew is a very positive term. It does not mean shame. It does not mean embarrassment. What is it? And I want you to notice also in the language of the Mishnahs, when it's stating it about the positive and the negative qualities, it defines it as a characteristic of the person. It says, az panim le Gehenom, the person who is brazen in their character to Gehenom, a person who is boshet panim, who has this modesty in their character, le Gan Eden. Sometimes you have to deploy the brazenness, but it's not who you are. Now, what is this boshet panim? And this is what I wanted to uncover with you. The key to this is Rabbeinu Bachya's commentary, one of the Rishonim's commentary, one of the commentators from the Middle Ages on this Mishnah, where he explains the depth of what this is, and he links it to values of humility, the awe of Hashem versus the brazenness and the arrogance. And then there is the Rashbatz in his commentary. He says a fascinating thing. He says, and he quotes in the name of one of the sages anonymously, he doesn't even say who says it. He said like this, what is boshet? How do you define it? Seichel, intelligence and insight. And what is seichel, intelligence and insight? It is boshet, meaning this. And I think this is the true meaning of what this word means. I would translate it. There's no adequate English word to translate it. Let me say that. English does not have a word that adequately, the closest word that I think comes to it is the word sensitivity. It is a person who has the sensitivity, which I think has folded into that is an idea of empathy, awareness of the people around, a situation around. And az panim, a brazen person, has no social awareness. The brazenness and the brashness gives the person the strength to be able to do things which are jarring for other people because they don't have the empathy or the feedback to understand that what they're doing and the impact and how they're hurting somebody else's feelings and the impact that they're having. A boshet panim is a person who's deeply sensitive, completely aware, has tremendous EQ, and has sensitivity to how what they are saying is being received by others. There's a tremendous sense of awareness and sensitivity. How is what I'm saying being received by another person? What impact? Am I hurting them? Am I not? That is the Boshet Panim. The Boshet Panim is the person who is deeply sensitive. The Azut Panim is a brashness and insensitivity, a lack of awareness. And then if you understand that, then you understand this. The core quality that we are looking for is Boshet Panim, which is what it says. We have to be a person who, in our essence, we are sensitive and aware and acutely empathetic with the people around us. Once we have that, then we can deploy brazenness as a tactic. See, there's a difference between brazenness as a character trait and brazenness as a tactic. Azkanamer is as a tactic. You're going to have to do that. In order to do that, you're going to have to draw on a very deep strength of integrity, of courage. There are a lot of things that are going to have to go into that. But the core of the person is still a Boshet Panim. To be able to pull this off, to be a Pinhas, to be a person who's going to be bold and brash and do things which are going to jar, that has to be a calculated move where you realize what you're doing and you deploy the harshness and the firmness with intent to be able to achieve a particular end. But you're in control of the situation. The brash person is not, where they're not even aware of what they're doing. And so that then applies in the context of in parenting, in business, in community, in society. Sometimes you're going to need to deploy the tactic of the harshness, sometimes the appeasing. What's going to guide you? Well, what's right? Understanding the people that are around you, playing with the various scenarios of what can be done, and then making a call and a judgment call to say, this is now what I'm going to do. And deploying the softness is not always a compromise. Sometimes appeasement can be a compromise. Sometimes it itself becomes a very powerful tactic. There is the tactic of the firmness. There's also the tactic of the flexibility, where there's an amazing Mishnah in Pirkei Avot in chapter 3, Mishnah 13, that says something that on surface reading is very difficult to understand, because it says, whoever kol sheruach habriot nocha hemenu, whoever has the spirit of people who take pleasure and are pleased with them, Ruach hamakom noichem imenu, the Spirit of God is pleased with them. Meaning, there's a dimension that says we should be getting on with the people around us, that we should not be fighting and confronting and jarring. We need their support, because that's part of the way that human beings live together, that there's support, that we're working together, that we're persuading. And what's fascinating there, the Rivash brings the pasuk that says the ideal, and the Vilna Gaon brings the same pasuk on the Mishnah, umatzechein v'seichel tov be'einei Elokim ve'adam, that the ultimate goal is that we find favor in the eyes of God and in the eyes of people. We need to work with the people around us. And the Tiferet Yisrael says the way that we do that, it's part of the fulfillment of the mandate to love Hashem, which the Gemara in Yuma says, Sheyehei Shem Shamayim Yisaiva Ledecha, that the name of heaven should be beloved through you. How do you achieve that, says the Gemara in Yuma? It says you deal with people with integrity. You speak kindly and gently to them. Then the name of Hashem will be beloved through you. And so part of the interaction with people, it's not just that the firmness represents this is the way that you stand up for the values. It is also the gentleness, the kindness, the integrity, which Rabbeinu Bachya says, why is it that God's Spirit is happy when the spirit and the neshama of people are happy? Because he says God has created every human being in his image. And so deep down within every human being, there is a recognition of what is good and what is noble. And when you see integrity and kindness and gentleness, you're moved by it naturally, because you have the Tzelem Elokim, you have the image of God in you. And that becomes part of the way that we interact with the people around us. It's not just that we are standing up for principle and that we're fighting. It is also part of the deployment of that is part of saying, how do we make God beloved to people? We do that through gentleness, through kindness, through integrity. That's also a way of winning people over. On the other hand, sometimes to make a Kiddush Hashem in the world, we have to be gentle and kind and integrous. Sometimes to make a Kiddush Hashem in the world, to sanctify God's name, we have to act like Pinchas, to stand up for what is right, to disregard the consequences, to risk offending people and doing things which are jarring and troubling and disturbing to people, because we're standing up for the truth. But then the motivation has to be not to be right and not to be self-righteous. The motivation is la'asot ratzon avicha shebashamayim, to do the will of your Father in heaven. That is what the Mishnah sums it up. So in essence, we have these three guiding principles of how to manage it. We need the balance. We need to be constantly motivated for the sake of heaven. And we need to have an acute awareness and understanding that there are times to deploy kindness, integrity, gentleness, and there are times to deploy firmness, standing up for principle, and we're going to go through life balancing between those different callings. There's never going to be a simple answer. As the Sforno says, the simple answers will come when Mashiach comes and the world is filled with truth and God's presence. Until then, we have to work through the murkiness, the messiness of it, and to realize they're not going to be simple answers, and that holding all of this complexity together is part of what it means to grow as a human being and ultimately to achieve greatness.